was young, I did something bad. Unforgivable.
First of all, congratulations on the movie. I watched it again last night. It's fantastic. I loved it to bits. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I mean, being a parent myself is really hard hitting. I mean, my kids are not kind of just about to leave the nest or anything, but it was really kind of hard hitting and made me kind of think about when that time does come, you know, when my kids kind of hit 18 and it will be time to kind of, well, I live in Spain, so they probably won't move too far away, but like kind of the time when you realize it's time to kind of let them go and do their own thing, that kind of really got me thinking about that. So that's
well, hopefully that won't be too traumatic.
I hope not, especially not as much as the film anyway. So I'm kind of curious about the kind of the genesis of the film, because obviously it's very much told from a female gaze, a female perspective, no? So how did the actual idea about to tell it from a female perspective, but also to tell that specific story? Where did it all come from?
Yeah, well, it came from just what you were mentioning, which is fears around parenthood and my own fears about parenting. I wasn't a parent at the time. I'm still not, but I'm going to be in about a week. But I was thinking about basic fears around parenthood, the inability or the possible inability to keep your child safe, the desperate urge to protect your child, to prevent them from harm. And it felt like such a powerful and elemental and universal set of fears and anxieties that it seemed like a fruitful area to explore in a movie. Of course, it's been explored many times before, but it felt very present to me and very immediate. And so I started thinking about the kind of parental vigilante or parental revenge subgenre, like Taken or Death Wish or these movies where these kind of seemingly ordinary parents are transformed into these superheroes when their children are threatened or put in harm's way. And I just became interested in that subgenre. So I started to develop an idea around it. And that was the initial kernel, the initial impulse for this movie. And why I decided to to build it around a mother, a female protagonist. I think it was really just because I was thinking about my own mother and my own mother's attitude towards her children and certain aspects of her character that I thought might be interesting. The character that you see on screen now really is not very much like my mother at all. She went through a lot of changes, but my first stabs at writing this, it was inspired by my mom, and I just went from there.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine that, because it had me think about my mother, because my eldest son is 13 now, and like I left for university. I went from the north of England down to London, and I was like only 18, so I can imagine how impactful that must have been on my mother's life. It kind of really made me think about that. I imagine that was something that you thought about when you kind of started writing the film way back, like, was it 7 or 8 years ago you started writing this?
Yeah, I think so, something like that. It was a long and sometimes frustrating process getting this one off the ground, but it was a while ago. But my mother is not nearly as intense, is not nearly the kind of helicopter parent that Margaret, Rebecca Hall's character, is in the movie. My mom is, however, someone who was raised Catholic, so has certain tendencies towards what can I say? Has a kind of certain sort of masochistic tendencies, I would say, that I associate with Catholicism, that found their way into this character.
And something else that really kind of drew my attention was the fact that just a click of a switch. I don't want to give too much away, but Rebecca's character at the beginning is very staid in a way. She's very confident, or at least she comes across that way. Now she's even helping someone with their own toxic relationship. But then just at the flick of a switch, everything just kind of crumbles. That must have been a really complicated balance to find, in terms of telling the story and kind of to keep your audience hooked and kind of get dragged into this sudden switch, you know, from one second to another. She suddenly had this panic attack and just can't take anything, can't deal with anything. How did you go about how did you go about that? Was it based on anything specifically, kind of the research? Did you kind of find out that there was these dormant things that could be there for 20 years and then suddenly come flushing back in kind of a split second?
Yeah, well, the idea was that the character, that her presentation, her persona that we're introduced to early in the movie was all a construction, something that she built up around her trauma and the kind of pain and the kind of shame and self-blame and guilt and the PTSD that she was carrying with her whole life, that she built up this sort of character as armor around this, as a way to convince the world and convince herself that she was someone who is a very strong, very confident person. But the idea was that try and subtly introduce evidence of her past, evidence of how her past is still alive within her in those early minutes of the movie. So it didn't feel like so it didn't feel like there was just a tremendous left turn into something else, that there were crumbs there that indicated something roiling beneath the surface, something, a degree of internal angst that was fueling this kind of presentation of confidence and control. So the hope was to try and subtly suggest that, but not hit it too hard. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, completely. It actually leads me to the next question. I mean, in a similar way, it also, I don't want to give too much away, it's very difficult, but it then takes us on this journey where it kind of turns kind of a somewhat surreal, but remains grounded at the same time. And we kind of see her falling into what people could kind of chalk up as kind of her losing her marbles, no, but we never kind of feel that way. That must have been a really, really complicated balance, even more so than what I just asked you previously.
Yeah, our rule of thumb, we had two rules of thumb. One was that we were going to present everything in a very straightforward and realistic manner. So we weren't going to, the movie wasn't going to transform into something that was highly expressionistic or highly subjective or highly kind of enters into a kind of hallucinatory or fantasy zone. We were presenting everything that happens in this movie as if it were fact. And the other rule of thumb is that we didn't want to do anything that felt like we were robbing our protagonist of her dignity. We wanted to treat her with respect and present everything that happens, which it gets quite outlandish and quite intense. But the hope was that we always were on her side. We were always presenting her in a way that she was able to maintain some degree of dignity. And if ever we drifted into anything that felt like we were exploiting the character, or we were sort of treating her in a way that was dismissive or cheap, or did not respect her experience and her past, well, then we wanted to avoid that as much as possible. That was absolutely forbidden. Now, it's the degree to which we achieved that, that's up to the individual viewer, but that was really what we tried to do.
Yeah, and then in terms of kind of her experience and how she tries to deal with what happens this kind of the second time round, it really opened my eyes to how, when others try to help her, that they are her kind of her daughter and other people around her, they try to help her, she kind of feels like their help isn't going to help her. She kind of feels a victim of it, and she has to sort it out herself. Now, that was something that really opened my eyes to that kind of how they make themselves a victim at the same time. They can't really accept help from anyone else, because they kind of feel that they shouldn't. They're trying to help where they shouldn't be trying to kind of help her. No.
Right. I mean, I think that comes from something that's very important in the character is she has this enormous, she tragically blames herself for her own victimization, which is incredibly common in victims of abuse. There is this sense of responsibility for your own abuse, and it's absolutely awful and tragic, but also incredibly common that she's filled with shame, she's filled with guilt, and she feels entirely responsible for managing the situation herself, not reaching out to anyone, keeping it secret, and feels that it has to be her and her alone who confronts the situation and overcomes this monster in her life. And only by doing this and kind of martyring herself in the process does she feel like she can find the redemption that she deserves. Or that, I mean, that a redemption. Only then can she earn her redemption and finally wash away the guilt and shame that she's been carrying around with her entire adult life. That is something that I feel is really tragic about this character, that she feels that she and she alone are responsible for the situation and responsible for remedying the situation. So she is entirely alone throughout the entire movie.
Yeah. And then on a lighter note, and this is something maybe I'm reading between the lines, but I don't know if it was just happenstance, but the fact that Rebecca and Tim are both Brits, and maybe it's just because I was a Brit myself, but it just felt as though, I mean, maybe you didn't choose them specifically for this reason, but it really felt as though because those were two Brits in the US, it felt almost like that isolated incident that had happened in the past was kind of kept isolated because they were both Brits and then kind of thrown into the US. I don't know if that was something you did intentionally or it just kind of happened as a result.
It was something, I like that too. I like that they feel like aliens in this environment. They feel apart from the world around them because of their background, because of their accent. But no, the characters were in the script. They were written as Americans. Right. But we ended up casting two Brits in the lead roles, and it was initially Rebecca's idea. She wanted to do it with her natural accent, and but I thought that was a great idea. And then, of course, when Tim came on board, it would have been silly for him to be doing an American accent. So we thought, okay, well, they'll both be English, and it was a very, very simple adjustment to the backstory. It wasn't hard at all, and I loved it because they could use their normal voices, and it also did just as you describe it. It made them feel apart from this very American environment that they found themselves in.
No, definitely, yeah. And then aside from that, it does get in certain places that I wasn't actually expecting. It gets quite gnarly, but because at its core, it really is. It's very gnarly, very kind of some bloodletting there. So I wasn't expecting it. I mean, I imagined something was going to happen. It wasn't going to be too nice, but because it was such kind of at its core, it was such a psychological thriller. No, was there any kind of limits that you wanted to set? I mean, everything that happens towards the end is it's there for a reason. It never feels gratuitous, but it is really out there. Was there any kind of limits that you wanted to set, and was there any specific reason why you went as far as you did, or why maybe you didn't go even further, or you couldn't really go much further than that? Maybe, I don't know.
I was really enamored with this idea of the movie sliding into a slightly different genre in the third act, and trying to find a way to make that feel earned and make it feel organic, that the movie is a psychological thriller. It is a rather slow burn. There isn't a lot of violence. There's some, but there's not a lot of violence in the first two acts of the movie. It's fairly restrained, at least compared to many movies of its type. But then I just became very fond of this idea that the ending would be operatic, that all the tension that is built up in the first two acts would really explode, and it would be represented visually, and we would move into a much more of a horror space there. And so that excited me, and it felt justified to me because it felt like we needed that sense of catharsis. We needed that sense of everything kind of blossoming And in this case, it's quite bloody, but that without it kind of exploding in the third act, I felt like it would just be unsatisfying, both cinematically and emotionally. And so I thought, let's just go for it and try and make it feel like it is a natural extension of what came before.
No, I thought it worked really well. I thought it kind of brought everything that Tim brought to the film. It kind of rounded it off nicely, finished it off nicely, kind of full circle, and then kind of left everything for us to kind of ponder on. I mean, I'm still pondering on it since yesterday, which is kind of a sign of a perfect film.
Tim Roth without some kind of grand guignol, without some kind of bloody mess at some point. It's just
it could have happened in the back of a car like Reservoir Dogs, but yeah, no, exactly, yeah. So listen, we're out of time. It's 1:15. So thank you so much for your time. I wish you the best of luck with the film. So it's going to go down really, really well, and I hope to speak to you again sometime soon.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. All
right. All the best. Have a good day. Take care now.
I'm the only one that can see you. The only person that really knows who you are.